Hello and welcome back to another week of Cube coverage. This week we've got Lucia drafting Gabriel's Lorwyn Plane combined Lorwyn and Shadowmoor block cube. So, taking a look through some of the initial cards, my first impression of this cube was the removal is quite scarce, so those are going to be a priority. And there's a bit of a... We'll see if the drafters pick up on this. So, there's a lot of monocolor support in the cube, but none of it appears in the first pack. So there's a structure to the cube where the first pack is only Lorwyn and Morningtide, the second pack is only Shadowmoor and Eventide, and the third pack is a mix. So because all of the monocolor support is in the second pack, we might see drafters not realize that it's available, pass some stuff around in the second pack that they otherwise would have been playing. And a lot of these cards, quite obscure, quite lower powered, so reading through all the possibilities in the pack, Judge of Currents is a banger of a card. It gains a ton of life, it's extremely defensive. The hurdle here is if you are going for a monocolor route, then you're not going to be able to combine it with other merfolk because most of them are blue. And in Shadowmoor and Eventide, a lot of them are black as well, so that creates a bit of a problem for doing a tribal strategy. And we see Guile in the pack, so Guile is just kind of a big beta creature, but it does alright for the rate. 6 mana, 6/6, hard to block. The recursion ability does come up sometimes. And I'm expecting this to be quite slow, so not much removal and small creatures means it's very easy for there to be a board stall. Things are going to slow down quite a bit. Guile's counterspell ability, not that relevant. And so she's pulled Guile to the front. Roar of the Crowd is alright, but it is quite pricey compared to Oblivion Ring. I think Oblivion Ring is a pretty solid standout here in this pack. Removal is very valuable. It's a very good rate. Nothing else here really stands out. So I'm liking the Oblivion Ring here, unless she thinks that Guile is going to be the kind of card that's going to be hard to pick up. And it is a certified bomb. Otherwise, and she is going with the Oblivion Ring, so just picking up a very efficient spell there. Something that is going to be quite valuable in any white deck. So in Lorwyn, white decks leaned pretty heavily on Kithkin. Not so much for the tribal synergies, they were just very present, and the Surge of Thoughtweft was a pretty important common. Here we might see more of a blue-white merfolk approach, and Sig River Guide is a really seriously annoying merfolk. So this would push her away from mono-white, but it is a very good card. Lissalana Huntmaster, also pretty good, but that one leans a lot more on getting a higher density of elves, which is going to be maybe harder depending how things line up. There's a lot of creatures in Shadowmoor and Eventide that aren't any of the 8 core tribes from Lorwyn. Stonybrook Schoolmaster can also be pretty good. Makes a creature each time it gets tapped. You do need to find some way to tap it without getting it into combat if you want to keep it around for a long time. Or Thundercloud Shaman would have been good as well. Red-White Giants is a risky path to go down because a lot of the giants are so expensive, but Thundercloud Shaman is devastating. Shriekmaw, also a fantastic card, so you don't actually evoke it very often because by the time it's good, it's very likely you have 5 mana, and it's just a very efficient card at 5 mana. You're getting an easy 2 for 1, comes down early enough that you're generally pretty happy paying for it, and the 3/2 Fear Body is really relevant at that point in the game. Otherwise, Earwig Squad, real weirdo, pointed a bit more at Constructed. the prowl mechanic is very powerful. So if you are going for something tribal, that is one of the more powerful ways to do it. So there's a lot more possibilities in this pack. Sieg is very tempting. Thundercloud Shaman, Shriekmaw. Shriekmaw definitely the most powerful card if you're not building around it. And yeah, so Lucia is keeping her options open. And we have Harpoon Sniper, a very annoying card. With the lack of removal, this can single-handedly lock your opponent out of ever attacking you profitably unless they go for one big alpha strike. So a good move for the heuristic of, in these removal light cubes, you want something that generates value turn after turn that it's in play, so that if things stall out and the game drags on, you can use it to get ahead. Otherwise, the blue-white land is pretty decent fixing. Cloudgoat Ranger is a really powerful card, serious threat. One of its main strengths is its resiliency to removal, which is not going to be too relevant here, but a 5/3 flyer is just one of the better ways to actually end the game, I think, in this cube. And otherwise, Skeletal Changeling and Knight of Meadowgrain kind of filler level cards. Thorntooth Witch is pretty serious. If you can trigger it even twice, it's a huge beating. It is one of those cards that has a passive effect on the game, so I'd say Thorntooth Witch is one of the main reasons to be playing a Treefolk deck, especially a Treefolk deck with black, because a lot of them lean very heavily into mono green. So she is picking up the Harpoon Sniper. That's going to be brutal if her opponent is trying to engage in combat on any level, so attacking or blocking with that in play becomes a huge pain. Even just by itself, the creatures in Lorwyn block are very small, so there's a lot you can lock out just with the Harpoon Sniper. And here we see Senzair, a bit of a risky card to pick up. Surge of Thought Weft also depends a lot on preventing the board stall from happening. It's quite easy if your opponent can get down a 4/4 or some kind of larger combat ruining card that the buff is not going to be relevant. Kithkin Harbinger, I could see that paying off pretty well if she can pick up a Kithkin Bomb, something to break open a board stall. And we see some Giants cards coming around, so Stink Drinker Daredevil, one of the better Giants cards. Unlikely that Thundercloud Shaman is going to make it back around, unfortunately. But it might still be worth speculating on that. So nothing too exceptional here. I could see picking up the Vivid Land to keep her options open, but I think the utility of it, not too high here. I think a lot of the cards are very deck-specific, not really worth splashing. And there's a chance that she does wind up in a monocolor deck regardless. So it's a tough choice. The Stink Drinker Daredevil and the Kithkin Harbinger are both very speculative pickups. Sage's Dousing is also quite a good card, and she does have the option of going into a blue-white merfolk kind of strategy. And if things do pan out as a bunch of board stalls, then Jace is also a good option. So tons of reasonable, pretty good options. Really hard to pick a standout card. I could see her going for any one of 6 or 7 different cards here. And it's going to be a Lair Watch Giant. So that's more of a defensive card if your opponent's attacking a lot. Might wind up as a bit of a sideboard card in this format. We'll see. So Scion of Una, actually a really strong card in the fairies decks because the power buff means a lot with all the flying. And Crypt Swap is an alright removal spell. You know, they are high priority, but the drawback is actually quite relevant. There's a lot of stuff that can leverage the changeling creature to activate other synergies. Tarfire, on the other hand, is a high rate card, but you might be a bit loath to give up on the Shriekmaw. And Ajani Goldmane, another card that's good in a board stall, so if she can pair it with some token generation, maybe some flying. So it looks like white is pretty open. She's got a few white cards. It's pretty safe to stay on that track, and if she can stick to mainly picking up white cards, then it'll position her well for the Shadowmoor pack if mono white looks to be an option. So Pax Disdain, pretty decent as a black card. As I said, with the size of the creatures, you don't really have to go in on a tribal strategy for it to work. If you control 3 creatures, there's a very good chance it can do -2/-2, and that'll kill most of the things in the format. Otherwise, Smoke Braider was a linchpin of the elemental decks back in Lorwyn. Enabled a bit of a 5-color strategy when you had 2 of them. So I think Pax Disdain is pretty safe here. Final Sting Fairy it's at its best in a black-white strategy. So if you have a lot of small, low-power creatures, some tokens, your opponent blocks one, you can deal with the blocker, but the power level of it is probably not high enough to take it over Pax Disdain. And Fathom Troll, pretty reasonable blue card. Nothing too exceptional. And yeah, I think a bit of consideration to whether the door is closed on Smoke Braider. It might be too late in the draft to get into an elementals type of thing. But she is picking up the Final Sting Fairy, so works well with white cards in general. Looks like she's committing to playing black for the Shriekmaw as well. And Howltooth Hollow, unfortunately, very hard card to activate, so you can only cast the spell for free if both players' hands are empty, so it's quite easy for your opponent to sandbag one last card in their hand, prevent you from ever getting the land going. And Auntie Snitch, an alright way to keep up the pressure in longer games. She'd want to pick up a flying rogue or a flying changeling in order to get the recursion going. And otherwise, Spring Cleaning and the Blue Enchantment, more of a sideboard card. Force Fruition is quite situational. Another slow blue card coming around. And Maro, one of the out-of-plane inclusions in the cube. Well, the Giant Harbinger would have been really good with the Thundercloud Shaman. But I'm liking a bit more of a mono-white route. Wizen Sen, not a card I'm too inspired about in this format. I think the +1/+1 has a high chance of not mattering. And it represents maybe a weakness of white in this cube, that it tends to struggle as the game gets drawn out. So she's going to want to look for a way to break through board stalls, keep up with some kind of passive ability permanent of her own, because a lot of the white cards that care about combat and mana efficiency aren't going to play so well here. So yeah, picked up a Kithkin 2/1. Good way of accelerating out some 4-mana spell if she can line that up. And oh, it looks like this is the pack wheeling around. So Judge of Current still here is a really strong sign for a Merfolk strategy. That thing gains a ton of life and makes it pretty trivial to stay alive forever. But there's also quite a lot of red coming around. So if Thundercloud Shaman comes around, could be a possibility of a red-white giant strat, but I'd be surprised if no one's picked that up. So Stonybrook, Schoolmaster, and Mera Regery are alright pickups here. The Schoolmaster probably better if you can set up a way to tap it without risking it in combat. And otherwise, I think the Ring Skipper is alright for that kind of thing. A 2-mana 1/1 flyer is not a great rate, but it has good coverage of chump blocking when it would be bad otherwise. But yeah, so she's going for the Token Maker. If she can find a way to tap it repeatedly, it's going to represent quite a strong tool for keeping up in a longer game. And nothing exciting here. The Knight of Meadow Green, pushing her towards mono white if she picks it up, but it's really more of a early game defensive tool, which is not something that her deck is looking for. Otherwise, Noggin Whack is alright. Unlikely she's going to be able to prowl it, but it is the kind of value play that can matter a lot against players with 4, 5, and 6 mana spells. So Surge of Thoughtweft, an alright pickup here. If she can line it up to matter in an early game block, it can make a difference. And the Merfolk here, not really something she needs for going down a Merfolk strategy. As an Island Walker, it does alright with Judge of Currents, but against blue decks, the life gain is not going to be too important. So she's got Shriekmoor's her only real standout black card, so I could see her shifting into mono white in pack 2. Oblivion Ring and Shriekmoor, great first 2 pickups. Those are going to be a huge powerhouse in her deck. And Harpoon Sniper, pretty reasonable chance of making it in. All red cards. But Tarfire is pretty good here. If she wants to hedge into maybe playing red-white, I think Tarfire is a good option. I haven't played Shadowmoor myself, but I've been told that mono red was a pretty strong strategy in that set, based off of the red initiate common. But I think it's pretty late for her to go into mono white. Be giving up too many power cards. Too late to go into mono red, I should say. And Smoke Braider, not likely to make it into a deck, but it's alright. And now we're into pack 2, which is going to be pulling from an entirely different set of cards. So there's going to be a lot of hybrid cards, which are really strong for monocolor. Some fixing lands. And I believe the only artifact creatures in the block are in Shadowmoor, along with the only scarecrows. So Ballynock Trapper, a pretty good way to break through a board stall a little bit. 4 mana is a lot, but getting the 2 taps every turn is pretty great. So Unmake and the Fixing Land, also pretty good filler options, but not something that's going to scale into a long game. And Scarecrow and a Weirdo, so if you can find basically any artifact creature, it is a draw engine. And there's some other stuff you can do with Scarecrow in a longer game. Otherwise, Disturbing Plot, pretty decent if you have a good creature to recur. Shriekmaw would be top of the list, but there's a chance that she picks up something a bit more relevant. And Scarscale Ritual, a card I would actually rate pretty highly. There's a lot of cards you don't mind putting the -1 counter on because you're never attacking or blocking with them anyway. But it looks like it's between the Trapper and the land. The land is very tempting as it's unlikely she's going to get black-white fixing. But this is where you have to make a tough choice about if you want to just commit to mono-white, scrap the Shriekmaw, and she's picking up the Scarecrow, so quite a slow card. It's good at blocking if the game comes to that, by recycling artifact creatures to block with. And then the combination of keeping you alive and a slow card advantage engine can matter a lot. So these Hedge Mages, very much playable in decks that are only one of the related colors as long as the effect is worth it. Lich-Ridden Swamp, a bit of a weirdo, probably one of the better of that cycle of lands for this cube. And here, so Glenelendra Liege is an example of a card she could go for if she's going to play mono black, because the 3 hybrid mana symbols are quite hard to pay in a white-black deck, but if you're playing mono blue or mono black, it's a lot easier to cast. And Rise of the Hobgoblins, also a good way to break through in a longer game. Just a slightly overcosted token spell, but it plays defense ridiculously well. No one is ever attacking into that. Otherwise, Sig is alright, but you do want to pair it with some kind of evasion, which Shriekmaw is a good fit for. And if you want to break through with Rise of the Hobgoblins, you do need to pair it with some way to utilize the tokens, whether for some kind of goblin sacrifice synergy, or find some way to tap them or something like that. Because while the games do go long, the board can stall out to the point where the extra tokens don't matter for more than 1 damage, really. Otherwise, Patrol Signaler, a bit of an optimistic card to do organically. You need to find some way to tap it. And she's going with Rise of the Hobgoblins, so pretty efficient token maker. I can see that putting in some work. And here we have Cauldron Haze, which is a bit of a niche trick. Golden Glow Moth, which is not going to be any use to her. Mirror Weave is kind of interesting, so if you have the token generation and can outnumber your opponent's creatures, then copying any kind of big creature has a good shot of ending the game. But Divinity of Pride, oh, that is a beating. A 5-mana 4/4 flying lifelink is way above rate for this cube, and she's in exactly the right colors to be casting it. It looks like the perfect fit for a deck, giving the rest of the pack a little bit of a cursory look, but really, really good fortune to be seeing this in the pack. So the Divinity Cycle is one of those things that pushes people towards monocolor in Shadowmoor. So if you're playing mono white or mono black, you can cast it, and otherwise you can only cast it if you're playing white black. If you're playing, say, a white blue deck, then the 5 hybrid mana symbols are too prohibitive. You're not going to be casting it until you have, 8 or 9 lands in play. So, and the math on how often you can play Divinity of Pride is you have a 10% chance of being able to play it in a 2-color deck, and a 40% chance of being able to play it in a monocolor deck. And monocolor decks are more desperate for playables, so the way it shakes out, much more of a monocolor thing, but things have managed to line up, so she's got the perfect pickup for a white-black deck. And that is the kind of threat that's going to be able to play through a longer game. So we have Steel of the Godhead is alright. Resplendent Mentor is a real weirdo card, so it's an exceptionally good defensive card. If you have some white creatures, it can make it basically impossible for someone to kill you. The problem is it also doesn't help you kill your opponent, so you need to pair it with some kind of inevitability, otherwise you just get locked in a game that doesn't ever end. So, while it's a powerful card, what it does is not always useful. It might be a bit of a situational tool against the faster decks. Otherwise, Shield of the Oversoul is a way to give a white creature flying, which is pretty good utility. Steel of the Godhead grants lifelink to white creatures, which I'm guessing she won't be as interested in. There's already quite a lot of life gain. And picking up the Gwillian there, I believe is the name. So just a 2/4 that attacks alright into larger creatures. And the order there, a pretty weirdo card. A lot of stuff has to line up in order to activate its ability, so most of the time you'll need to attack with it first, which can be tough with a 1/4. And you won't always have a 3-mana creature in your graveyard. So it takes a lot of work to make Order of White Clay good. Otherwise, Reaper King, so in a 2-color deck, Reaper King costs 8 mana. So it's an 8 mana 6/6, but if you play a second Scarecrow, then it's pretty great. Otherwise, Tatterkite is alright as a flyer. Mistveiled Plains, a very situational effect, mainly a counter against mill, but rarely worth the tapped land. And the Goat land would be a big cost to play, since she wants to be able to cast the Divinity of Pride reliably, so a colorless land is a big obstruction. But it does make white tokens, which, if she can pick up something that goes along with the white tokens, that can be relevant. But just picking up the Order of White Clay and Springjack Shepherd. So there is a funny combo here where the Shepherd makes a ton of tokens. You can sacrifice them to the land. There's a lot of other things you can do with them in the block. But I could see picking up the Shepherd in case the land comes around. Otherwise, nothing too exciting coming around. Fire Spout, historically quite a powerful card. The creatures in the block are small enough that 3 damage is enough to kill basically anything, and the ability to control whether or not it hits flyers or non-flyers means you can often sculpt a scenario where you're removing a lot of your opponent's creatures without removing your own. And picking up the Springjack Shepherd, so Chroma works with the hybrid mana symbols, so Divinity of Pride is going to contribute 5 towards the Chroma ability, so even just those 2 cards together will make 6 goats. And with the Ajani, she can leverage the goats into something more useful. And not seeing much in this pack, so looks like a pretty even spread of colors, no real indication of things getting passed around. Apothecary Initiate is fine, but not good. It's kind of a filler 1-mana creature if you're just trying to load up on those. And Thoughtweft Gambit is a very expensive stall breaker if your opponent's looking to block. So Crowd of Cinders, too heavy on the mono black for her to play. Mystic Gate can be good fixing if she's got a blue card she really needs to play. And this card, the blue creature is hard to evaluate, bounces creatures with counters on them. I didn't see a lot in the packs that indicated there's going to be a lot of creatures with counters on them, so probably a pretty niche ability. So yeah, it's looking like a primarily white deck, going to be aiming to set up a bunch of tokens and buff them up with a Ajani or find some other way to get through. Shriekmaw and Oblivion Ring, really nice pickups. And just picking up the black card there. Not much in the pack. So the fixing land has come back around. And Ballynock Trapper, also an alright option. These Scarecrows they're pretty overcosted. A lot of them can be used to fill a kind of defensive role if your deck struggles with blocking, but I don't think blocking is going to be that important or something that she's going to struggle with, so just going to be the fixing land. And no white or black in this pack. Leechridden Swamp is maybe one of the better of that land cycle, but it requires 2 black permanents in play, and that's going to be a tall ask for such a heavily white deck. And Kithkin Shield dead, doesn't really help her here. I could see picking up the Mirror Weave. Or the Lockjaw Snapper. She's going for the Snapper. And the Resplendent Mentor is back. So, if nothing else, this is a good sideboard card against a deck that is playing a lot of flyers or some other kind of aggressive technology. Steel of the Godhead, not really worth it for the lifelink. It's not going to matter a lot. And there is the Goat Land. So there's a bit of utility in very, very slowly making goat tokens. If she's got a 7-mana spell, then there could be games where she converts the goats into a big burst of mana to make it happen. Very good with Rise of the Hobgoblins, so an X spell would be the ideal output. And reviewing what she's got, so I think only 2 removal spells. The Harpoon Sniper, a little lacking in support, but I could still see playing it for how annoying it is. And then 2 real big token makers, and then a Ajani and Resplendent Mentor to leverage them. With the hope that the Goat Land can produce a ton of mana for the Hobgoblin spell. Though, on reflection, all it is doing is upgrading the goats into 1/1, so maybe not the most high priority combo to assemble. But even with the Divinity in her deck, I think the cost of a colorless land is fairly low. the Goat Maker is something that she wants to be playing anyway. So pack 3 is going to be a mix of Lorwyn and Shadowmoor. So tough to say what she'd be looking for in there. A way to tap the Stonybrook Schoolmaster would be good. The Resplendent Mentor actually does a great job of that. So that's a nice little combo there if things stall out. And then maybe some way to leverage the tokens, maybe a removal spell. Something like that, because these 1/1 token producers, they are often presenting themselves as an aggressive card, but in a format with low removal, small creatures are actually a lot better at defending than attacking, because your opponent can set up a block where they kill 2 or 3 of your creatures for free, and it's just much more profitable to leave them back on defense, especially with Rise of the Hobgoblins giving them first strike. So a gang of first striking blockers is basically impossible to profitably attack into. So she's got infinite defense. If she can land the Ajani, then that'll carry quite well. Mutavault is a nice land. One of the most efficient creature lands I think ever printed. Una's Blackguard leans pretty heavily into rogues, so she doesn't have other +1 counter stuff to go with it. So without many rogues in her deck, I doubt she's even got one. It's not going to have much going on. Oh, it does work alright with Auntie Snitch. But probably not something that she's immediately in the market for. Otherwise, these red cards are alright if she wants to switch it up. Incendiary Command is pretty bad, but Pyroclast Console can do alright if things are... Well, again, the types are not going to line up. She doesn't have many elementals or shamans, so... It's a brutal card when you trigger it, but she's not going to be able to trigger the Pyroclast Console. Weed Strangle is a pretty viable option here. It's one of the few removal spells in the cube. She's pretty desperate for that kind of effect. And Liliana is... It's got some good utility because it's a Planeswalker. She's got a very good shot of defending it as long as her opponent doesn't have evasion. But it's one of the weaker Planeswalkers. Doesn't contribute too much to the board. And I think there's a real risk in this format that you could just run out of things to tutor for. As powerful as the Vampiric Tutor effect is, it's not quite the game closer that you're looking for. So you'd need to plus her until ultimate, and like I said, it's the kind of effect that her deck wants. So it's still a pretty reasonable addition, but it's one of the weaker forms of it in the cube. And while Mutavault is a more powerful card in Abstract, it's not really at its best in this format, so there's not much of an emphasis on combat. You know, the games are not going quick enough. So Liliana fits a lot better into what the format's about, what a deck is about. Or Ashling the Pilgrim that's got to be one of the more powerful cards in Lorwyn block, but Dread is nice. So Fear is really strong evasion. The recursion ability is relevant. It's basically impossible to attack into. Purity is alright, but generally weaker. It's just a niche hosing ability with a less powerful form of evasion. And more removal with Eyebite's Ending, but Dread is a real beating. So Ashling, generally the activate multiple times a turn trigger is something you actually want to avoid. So it just kind of limits you to activating it twice a turn. If there's an extreme emergency, you can activate it the third time, or you can do it to symmetrically damage both players in order to lower the life totals and get a win. But with Ashling killing itself with the ability, it is pretty hard to line up a situation where it benefits you more than just continuing to grow the Ashling. Now, the one difficulty with Dread is that it costs triple black, and it looks like her deck's going to be leaning pretty heavily white, so I could see going for a split of 9 or 10 plains and 7 swamps, and with 7 swamps, it's pretty hard to actually get the draw to cast Dread, even at 6 mana. Her fixing land does quite a lot of work there, basically counts for 2 swamps. But maybe Purity is the better pickup purely for color considerations. She cares about the white mana symbols. It's a lot easier to cast, and depending if she sees something, she could always stick to mono white. Shriekmaw is the only thing really pulling her into black at the moment, but she's going to go with the Dread. And Puppeteer click, a Weirdo card. Not sure how good it is. Quite hard to evaluate that one in this format. And checking the Scarecrow. So she's in the market for 1 or 2 big artifact creatures if she wants to be playing the Scarecrow to recur them. Otherwise, Kithkin Rabble is an alright way to leverage tokens. The rate on it is pretty bad, but you can set up scenarios where it's a 10-10 and it's at least forcing a chump block. And Plumeveil is a very powerful card, but not really something that she's in the market for. Doesn't have a problem with flyers, really. Doesn't have a problem playing defense. More looking for something proactive to play offense and end the game. So I think it's between the utility of the Scarecrow or the game ending of the Kithkin Rabble. There's also a decent shot that she can pick up Kithkin Rabble later on the wheel. It's very loudly mono white, so not a huge chance that someone else is going to pick it up. And some nice blue and black cards getting passed around. Wow, Cryptic Command. So nothing really in this pack for her. This is an opportunity to double check how things are looking with colors. So currently her only real draw to black is Shriekmaw and Dread. So it might be that one of these other spells is more relevant. But I think Nightshade Stinger it's a very slow clock, but it does alright. And just picking up the 2-drop Kithkin. Well, Deathbringer Liege. So another black-white hybrid card. Very nice to be seeing this in the pack. Works well with tokens. If she can cast the Harvest Gwillion or Divinity of Pride with it, it goes really well. It is a little awkward because of the 2 abilities. I think the black trigger is often going to be more potent. But there's a little bit of a trick. She can use the white trigger to tap her own creature to get the 1/1s. And Revel Songhorn, another card that taps creatures, but not one that's worth playing in this situation. And Glamour Spinners, not doing much. She doesn't have an aura in her deck. And a 2/4 Flash Flyer is nothing special. Such a Spirit is... It's got a bit of attacking utility, so if you've got a creature that your opponent is angling to trade with, then the threat of activation is pretty relevant for getting in damage, and even just by itself being a 1/1 flyer, there's a lot of situations where just sitting back and protecting your important creature from removal is going to be good utility, and the 2-mana 1/1 flyer is going to be good enough on its own a lot of the time. There's ways to buff it. It can block opposing flyers. And she agrees, picking it up. So, Malicious Pride, not going to have much utility here. Quite difficult to trigger without the Flying Changeling. Or just a general density of combat tricks and removal to keep the board moving. Gold Meadow Harrier is very nice. So, represents a lot of control over the board. And Warren Pilferers is also nice. And Windbrisk Heights. This is a stacked pack. So Windbrisk Heights, pretty reasonable card to actually get the 3 creatures attacking trigger, and very good effect to have on a land. She's got enough expensive spells that are really nice to get down with it. So, looks like very nice pickup for the deck. And Plague of Vermin, this is a card that helps get the game over with if her draw is shaping up to be too defensive. So, each player pays a bunch of life, gets a bunch of rats. If one player is quite far ahead on the life total, then they can make enough rats to knock out the other player. The biggest hurdle is that it's 7 mana. So unless she's got the goat combo, it's going to be really hard to actually cast it and be at parity on the board. By that point, her opponent might have some kind of engine or annoying creature going on that is overrunning her. So possibly a sideboard card for an overly defensive opponent if the games are dragging out and it's looking like the right game for it. Otherwise, yeah, wasn't much going on with the Fists of the Demigod. The black side of that aura is not very relevant and not going to line up very well with how heavily white her deck is. And the Kinsbale Border Guard, unfortunately, the only card she can pick up there. Her token producers are making goblins and goats, so it's not going to be able to scale up large enough to really do that well. So yeah, the big open question is whether she'll have enough merfolk to be playing the Harpoon Sniper. I think it's mainly the Stony Brook Schoolmaster that goes with it. It's not quite worth playing if it's your only merfolk, but you only need 4 or 5 other merfolk for it to be good. And not much here. The kinship is not going to trigger very often on that, so it's just a question of if a 5 mana 3/2 flyer is worth it, and there are some matchups where that is worth it. And otherwise, all the cards being passed around are blue and red, which is not ideal for the white-black drafter. But she's picked up some great cards for her deck already. Doesn't need much more out of this pack. Unlikely she's going to get anything else that's too exciting. I think we're really down to the dregs here at this point. So, could be the 5-mana 3/2 flyer. Could be picking up a powerful card to prevent someone else from getting it. Very marginal choice here. And yeah, I think the overcosted flyer has got more utility in the matchups where it's going to be good. And Inkfathom Infiltrator is actually quite a strong card, but double black is too hard to pay. I think her deck's going to be leaning very heavily towards white, so the Scarecrow is a better pickup. And nothing at all here. I could see going for the counterspell just because it's cutting off interaction that other people would really like to have. And yeah, Memory Sluice, really not the kind of card she wants. Not going to be conspired because it requires black creatures to tap for that. And yeah, that flyer too overcosted to go for, so looks like it's going to be a very heavy white deck, splashing black. Ready to go for the first game. Up against Pat with what looks like a blue-black, fairly evasive rogues deck. And he's got the Inkfathom Infiltrator. This is a sick creature. This is one of the best 2-drops in the cube, I'd say. Keeps the pressure up. Represents a way to play through a board stall. Keep up in a longer game. And it's even enabling his Prowl synergies. So Prowl is a really powerful keyword. It had some very efficient cards printed for it. It's not too hard to turn on, so very nice payoff for the rogue synergies. And looks like Pat's angling to just take out all of Lucia's removal. Make sure that she can't interact with his threats. And have a bit of a look to see if there's some bombs worth picking up here. Notable taking out the Shriekmoor, so Shriekmoor not so good against black creatures. That means Pat's probably got a pretty serious mono blue creature to follow up here that he wants to protect, or at least hiding somewhere in his deck. And if nothing else, he's pulling out Lucia's good top decks. So 3 5-mana spells that play really well in a longer game. Makes it more likely she's going to flood out. More likely she's just not going to have anything good to play later in the game. And this is a ton of damage to be dealing this quickly. And he's got all of the fairies in his hand have flash, so no need to tap out. Can threaten a counterspell or something similar. And here we see Springjack Shepherd is a pretty powerful card on defense normally, but with all of the evasion, Pat's pretty good at ignoring it. So Fairy Harbinger looks like, oh, that is a very nice fairy to get. That's got to be one of Pat's better cards. So he's got a really serious density of fairies here. But the important thing is the rogue type and flying, because in what's likely to be a lot of board stalls, flying is just huge. Flying plays very well with buffing effects like the Liege here. And that's 6 damage already this turn, so pretty likely Lucia is going to be dead next turn unless she can pull out some really serious play. Oh, sorry, 7 damage. The Ink Fathom Infiltrator gets +2/+2 from the Liege. And Divinity of Pride. This is the ideal spot for it, but it's not going to be good enough. Can't block the Infiltrator. And just making sure with the Pestamite. That is a swift game 1. Did not give Lucia a chance to do anything really. And showing the power of evasion in making sure that your opponent cannot stop you from doing your thing. And this time we're just seeing an early rise of the Hobgoblins, so Lucia looks like she's drawn only 2 or 3 lands, quite a lot of her expensive spells. Unlikely she's going to be able to pay the large X value there, so she's just getting it down as a defensive combat trick. And Pat's got a 2-drop, but looks like he's much happier leaving up a counterspell or some kind of instant speed trick. So I think this is a very common misreading of Spellstutter Sprite. So a lot of these kind of conditional counterspell effects, they usually say counter a spell unless you pay some more mana. Spellstutter Sprite is unusual in that it counters spells of a specific mana value. So not the first time I've seen this misreading of the card. Basically every other conditional counterspell works the way that Pat assumed it works, so a bit unfortunate, but I think quite a long time before Order of White Clay was going to be relevant this game regardless. And looks like this is just a setting up with Ajani. If she can keep it alive until next turn, at least it represents some +1 counters if she can get some tokens going. But things not lining up very well for Lucia in this game either. And looks like he's considering which discard spell to go for, so this one lets Pat look at every card in Lucia's hand and choose one to discard, as opposed to Helm of the Ghastlord, which is overall more efficient, but Lucia gets to choose the discard. Of course, he's only got 2 fairies, so Lucia gets to hide her best card. And looks like he's going for the land here. He says, odds are she's not going to have many creatures in play. Unlikely for the buff to make a significant difference. The main consideration would be if she can cycle it off, and in that case, taking a land still makes a lot of sense. So, considering if she wants to try and keep Ajani alive for another turn, on the face of things, it looks like, well, if Pat doesn't have a black spell, then he can't kill the Ajani this turn. She can try and set up to get more creatures in play, get more value out of the minus. Would rather have it on the following turn rather than this one. But he does indeed have a black spell, and this is a really nice one. So Graveguild Duo is a 5 power fear creature now for this turn. Easily kills the Ajani single-handed. And he gets in for 4 with the other creatures. So killing the Liege here would be priority number 1. Its passive effect on the game is really quite crushing. And, oh, she doesn't have the 5th land for Deathbringer Liege either, so that would be her way to keep up in as the game progresses, and an unchecked Deathbringer Liege can catch her back up to what Pat's doing, but missing the 5th land drop is pretty devastating. And we're seeing Helm of the Ghastlord, so +2/+2, draws an extra card every turn, Lucia discards a card every turn. Triggers the Grave Guild duo for more buffing and fear. And that is a very fast start, pulled straight ahead. What a beating, and Pat moves on to the next round, up against Matt. So it looks like Matt is playing a red-white deck. I spied a giant in there, so we could be seeing some more expensive spells. These big, slower creatures, quite vulnerable to an all-flyers and evasion plan. So we'll see how things line up here. And Safe's turn to send in the Mutavault. Matt's not going to be wanting to trade that off anytime soon, as he's going to be needing the mana from it quite badly. And already Pat's sitting on a Counterspell or a Pestamite, so we'll see what Matt is willing to play into it. And the Hedge Mage, not going to get a trigger here. Sees it's pretty rare for the trigger to line up to do anything, so better to get down on board, try and set up a clock against all of these flyers. And Pat agrees the Hedge Mage is not the most premium spell for this game. Not going to bother countering it. And now he's used his flash threat, so he's got to make a choice about whether to hold up counter magic. Helm of the Ghastlord's going to be really great if he can untap with it next turn. So, especially with the counter spells, Matt's got a 1-turn window to find some way to stop or interact with this. Otherwise, he's just going to get run over. Oh, and he has drawn it. This is a really powerful burn spell. You'd want to save it for an opportunity to get the copy, but... Oh, starting off with the Hex Hunter is another way to get it done, so... That can just remove the enchantment. And Lurebound Scarecrow, actually a pretty good card here, so... He's got 2 other white permanents. Very unlikely that Pat is going to have 2 removal spells to remove them, and even if he does have the removal, he's not going to want to spend it there. So leading off with the Thoughtseize. These are some pretty good cards, actually. And yeah, taking away the Liege. Pretty much all the Lieges are major bombs. We saw how it just cut the length of the previous match in half when it showed up previously, so smart choice to get that out of the way. And something really impressive about Burn Trail here, if Matt does the Conspire, then Pat's Counterspell is not going to be able to counter both halves. So next turn, Pat's got a bit of a choice here if he wants to point both of the burn spells at the Pestamite to just guarantee it's out of here. He could sacrifice the Hex Hunter, but that's putting him at risk of getting his Lurebound Scarecrow 2-for-1. So, as weird as it is, I could see Matt going for a double burn trail on the Pestamite here. It would take out everything that Pat's got going on. And it wouldn't get rid of the counterspell, but it would at least play through it. But he's going to force the counterspell here instead. So Dream Fracture counters one of the copies. Amoeboid Changeling looks like quite an unassuming card. There's a lot of times where having an untapped Changeling makes a lot of your opponent's plays impossible. It can counter an effect like Eyeblight's Ending, break up a lot of tribal synergies, things like that. And with Pat drawing 2 cards a turn, the onus is really on Matt to try and turn the game around. It's only going to get harder for him over time, and if he gives Pat too much breathing room, his counterspells are going to be able to lock him out of the game. So, prowling the Earwig squad, thanks to the rogue type on Pestamite. Thundercloud Shaman is a very good card to know about. That's probably Matt's best draw in this situation, so nabbing that one is going to make a huge difference. Otherwise, nothing here that lines up too well against the Pestamite. I could see taking... Chandra is also a very good pick, so... Chandra is a very efficient Planeswalker. Her ability to defend herself and deal with creatures of multiple sizes, and starting with such a huge loyalty, makes her a really menacing Planeswalker. You can see how, if Matt could cast her on this board state, he could take out the Pestamite, set up a block on the Earwig squad, and quickly run away with the game. But unfortunately, his draws have been pretty slow. He hasn't got much of a way to keep up with Pat. He's not pressuring him hard enough to get below all of his card draw. The Earwig squad makes a good blocker, and he can't even attack, or it'll be able to race back again. And Pat's even got a counterspell. He's got the option of leaving up in case Matt's got some way of coming back in the game. So, pre-combat, Eyeblight's Ending, possibly a sign that Pat is going to be sending in the Earwig squad, dealing a ton of damage. And he's giving the Pestamite lifelink. Pretty soon he'll have enough mana to be able to advance his board state while leaving up the counterspell, and that's going to lock out almost all of Matt's remaining options. So leading with the Daredevil, doesn't have the colors of mana to utilize it with his Blind Spot Giant, otherwise he'd be able to cast a 1-mana Giant off of it. Ooh, Spellstutter Sprite. Pat's got all of the interaction lined up. He's also got a Liege left. I believe it's too intensive for him to cast right now, but all of the Lieges are massive bombs, so it would take a lot for Matt to keep up with the Liege in this situation. So leading with the thieving sprite, he's got 3 fairies, so you can look at every card in Matt's hand. See what's going on. So Purity is Matt's only flyer, but at 6 mana, it's very unlikely to resolve. So he's going with the Giant Harbinger. That represents a possibility for Matt to draw Thundercloud Shaman, but he would need to top deck a mountain in order to have double red to cast it regardless. And now that Pat's got 3 fairies in play, his spell stutter sprite is going to be able to do some serious work. Cloudgoat Ranger is a fantastic giant. It's a flying blocker, but there's just too much going on. Not going to be able to keep up, and Pat takes the first game. So we'll see if Matt can get on board early this time. There are a scarce number of 2-drops that attack well. Soulbright Flamekin may represent quite a lot in this game, so if he can get on board early, race the flyers, and Pat's suite of discard and counterspells is overall quite weak against cheap creatures. So, while in general I'm concerned about getting into a board stall in this format, Pat's deck is not so good at blocking. It's not the angle that he wants to be playing the game at, so you're not too concerned about getting your 2-mana 2/1 locked out of combat that way. And this is a nice 1/2 curve, so Thieving Sprite going to get the second worst card in Matt's hand, and possibly getting more if he can deal some damage with it with the Blackguard in play, but this represents Pat being unable to play defense. Neither creature can block the 2/1 and survive. The question is, will Matt get Pat down to 14 at life and then be locked out of combat after that? He's got quite a lot to work through. And Blind Spot Giant, pretty safe pick here. The Blind Spot Giant only costs 1 mana with the Daredevil in play, and with Mutavault, it's very hard to force your opponent out with the drawback. If you even have 1 mana left, you can tap the Mutavault to animate itself, then you've got a giant and you can make a good attack with your 4/3. But once again, it looks like Matt is a bit constrained on red mana. So we're seeing him offering up the trade with the Mutavault, saying he needs mountains a lot more than he needs a colorless land. And this is good for keeping him up in the race. Pat's looking at setting up a 3/3 Scion, 3/3 Thieving Sprite. It'll have Shroud thanks to the Scion of Una. And once that is down, the game is going to come back to whether Matt can cobble together a removal spell, because the 3/3 Thieving Sprite is going to block all of his creatures. Pat's not at a low enough life total to worry about getting Alpha Striked. But he's going for the Una's Blackguard discard, considering casting the Scion before damage to get in 2 extra damage. And without a counterspell in hand, this is a pretty good move to make now. And Matt forced to discard an uncastable card. This is where a Thundercloud Shaman would just be instant game over. Destroys all of Pat's creatures. Takes him completely out of the game. But it's going to be Fury Stoke Giant, which is also a pretty good bomb, so this represents multiple removal spells. He's going to be able to take out all of Pat's creatures. And Pat's leftovers are not very good. He's got the Helm of the Ghastlord, which is good with his Inkfathom Infiltrator. But a creature that cannot block, and going up against Fury Stoke Giant, which is just pretty big by the standards of Lorwyn. I don't think there's a way for Pat to come back here. So, no blocks. Pat's down to 5. Matt's going to probably sandbag the Hedge Mage in case there's a particularly good artifact or enchantment. Or just play it out to improve the likelihood of lethal. I don't think there's any sweepers in black. And just a desperation move from Pat, seeing if there's anything in his deck that can get him out of this. And that's game 2. That was a clutch Fury Stoke Giant. Just undid everything that Pat spent the game setting up, so very potent way to catch up. And now we've got Figure of Destiny. This was one of the standout constructed cards from the block. Plays very well against counter spells. It's gonna put Matt way ahead in the race. And we see Pat's got a Jace that he can't cast out of color requirements. The Napsol click that counts blue permanents is going to take a lot of work to get it up to a 3-3. And I think some consideration as to whether he wants to play a blue or a black permanent to try and set up the click. So yeah, sticking with the Changeling. The Changeling, I believe, has a strange interaction with Figure of Destiny. So if Matt doesn't level up the Figure of Destiny here, what Pat can do is he can leave up the Changeling, and then Matt can no longer use the second or third ability of the Figure of Destiny, as Pat can just remove its creature types in response. So a clash there for the Sprite recursion ability. Draws are losses, so Pat's Sprite is just gone. And if Pat can set up a block on the 2-2 Figure of Destiny, he can at least lock that out of combat for a little while. Now, the next layer to this Amoeboid Changeling Figure of Destiny interaction is... So when Matt goes for the second ability like that, Pat has the opportunity to remove creature types from it, and then the ability fizzles. If Matt had one more mana, then he could respond to the Changeling by giving it the creature type again. But it looks like the figure is up to a 4-4 now. Pat can eventually lock it out from the third ability, but unlikely that that is going to line up very easily. Looks like Matt's got a ton of expensive cards in his hand he'd rather be casting. And he's going for the Scourge, so all in on the Figure of Destiny. It's up to a 6/6 lifelink, and he can bring it up to 7/6 this turn. So threatening to wipe out the Jace in one shot. And Pat's going to cash in the Changeling for a chump block. Oh, but Eyeblight's ending is going to break it all up. So, not many ways to protect the figure in this set. Pat can pretty safely wait until the last second to fire off the Eyeblight's ending. Oh, and here we have Chandra. Chandra's huge loyalty makes it really hard for Pat to pressure. As I said, the abilities look quite underwhelming, but the way it shakes out in a game is it can really just lock your opponent out. And it's going to be a Planeswalker fight, so Jace, a lot slower to get going, a lot more vulnerable, but it's been in play for quite a few turns. It's going to help Pat find an answer to the Chandra, likely in the form of some cheap flyers and then a Liege to buff them up. So still going for the symmetrical draw here. Inkfathom Infiltrate is really nice here. So if he plays Infiltrator and holds up the Liege, then it's very unlikely Matt is going to use -3 on the Chandra to try and kill the Infiltrator. So you can flash in the Liege and save it from the Chandra. Oh, sorry, I misread the Liege. I thought it had flash. So just having to lead out with the Liege. Still a major tax on Chandra's loyalty. But I believe that's a purity in Matt's hand. So if he sets up a flying blocker, pretty unlikely that Pat is going to have a removal spell for it. He's drawn a lot of cards from Jace, but the density of them in this cube is quite low. And with Jace's ultimate still 2 turns away, very likely he'll be able to set up an attack to keep the Jace under control. In fact, this is the product of some errata. The text on Chandra Nala says it deals damage to players. It actually deals damage to players and Planeswalkers. So Matt can buy himself an extra turn or 2 with the Chandra. But it looks like he's more interested in playing offense to get this Jace off the table. So Chandra's going to die. Matt's going to be left with this big flyer to try and pressure the Jace. And leading off with the Fairy Harbinger here. So Pat's got to make a bit of a choice. He can get his Counterspell, which is abstractly a very powerful card, but it may be that Matt's play next turn is going to get him far enough ahead that the Counterspell will be too late. He can pick up a Pestamite, which does a reasonable shot at defending the Jace. But Pestamite is kind of a temporary measure, so... And he's going for the Lord here. So, Scion of Una with Napsaw Click is going to make it quite a large creature. Not big enough to profitably block the Purity. But looking towards whatever Matt is going to be playing this turn, there's a chance that the extra power and toughness is going to matter here. And Matt's got a lot of options. So forcing the chump block here. Pat has been representing that he's all in on trying to ultimate the Jace to end the game. Oh, and Cloud Goat Ranger is really nice against blue if you can resolve it. No great ways to interact with it. It's going to be able to force through at least a bit of damage if he sends in the tokens, but very likely he's just going to buff up the Cloud Goat Ranger and force a lot of chump blocks. So a 3/3 Napsaw Click here. Can't block with the Infiltrator. And it's looking like the Jace is going to go down, which is grim news for Pat's plan. Matt has just resolved too many expensive spells for Pat to really have a shot in this game anymore. He was looking to lock Matt out with counterspells and discard and end the game quickly with flyers. But he's been forced into a slower, more defensive game, and the fairies do not play defense very well. Oh, this is really crushing. So Matt gets 6 shocks for free, which is at the very least going to kill all of Pat's creatures. He's got an opportunity to flash in Scion of Una here, but it's not going to change the calculus. Matt can just kill the Scion in response, and then the 2 damage will still resolve on the click. So, quite awkward here. He wants to be flashing in the Scion on Matt's end step, but the Fury Stoke Giant ability is going to last long enough that if he does that, it's going to die, depending if Matt leaves behind one untapped creature. Depends if Matt is going to see the possibility of a fairy being flashed in, or just push an extra 2 damage. And I think that was also a calculus on whether he can just let Jace ultimate. So we're looking at least 10 damage coming across. Or 9 damage, sorry. And then the last 2 points to finish it off from the Fury Stoke Giant ability. So Pat's got the Creekwood Liege, which is one of the better lieges, can fight a real game on its own, but the mana color requirements have kept him from casting Fairy Macabre. And Scion of Una, not at its best on this board. If Pat can't deal with the Cloud Goat Ranger and the Purity, it's going to be really hard to keep up. The Purity just threatening to kill him in the air pretty easily. If Matt can find a way to kill the Fury Stoke Giant, that'll devastate Pat's board once again. And here, so Matt's offering up a free block on the Fury Stoke Giant because letting it die is going to give him a ton of value. So he does not mind that happening at all. And it's looking like just a chump block on the Cloud Goat Ranger. So there's a threat of activation there. Matt can activate it if Pat doesn't block, so it is representing 5 damage potentially coming across. And at long last, the Moonhold is being cast, so Pat is locked out of sorcery speed spells this turn, but he probably is not too concerned about that. He's only got instants left, and they're really not going to catch him up here. And we're off to the finals against Felix. So leading off with a Hideaway land. These lands generally quite powerful because of their low opportunity cost. Even if you only cast the card off of them 10% of the time, that's often worth it for a tapped land, getting a card and a bunch of extra mana back. And Nullspine Ridge does come up sometimes. It's one of the rarer ones. It's not as bad as Howltooth Hollow. So we'll see if things line up that way this game. And just leading with a 1-mana 1/1. So Felix's deck is a 3-color brew. It's a lot of the just powerful gold cards. And we've got Brian Stoutarm. A weird big lifelinker. Represents quite a lot in a racing situation like we had against Pat. But my assessment of Felix's deck is it's going to be more of a mid-range grind out. Blocking's going to be very easy. Things are going to get gummed up, and the game's going to be decided by a creature with a passive ability like a Liege or some kind of once per turn trigger. So we do see a Liege in Felix's hand and a Planeswalker. Planeswalker's also looking to be quite potent here once the board gets gummed up. But we're starting off with Garruk. And yeah, going for the mana producing ability. So he's got a follow-up play here. We'll see if it's something that can stop Brian Stoutarm. And it is, it's Lignify. Lignify, a very potent removal spell. The drawback is giving your opponent a blocker, but blocking is not so important. The key danger is Elvish Hex Hunter is here, so Matt can unlock Brian, kill Garruk. Being able to answer one of Felix's best cards with that removal spell is really important. And we've got a risky Lure-bound Scarecrow. This is exciting. If Felix has got a way to remove Brian's Stoutarm, that is going to just turn the game upside down. And it looks like he doesn't. It's Nath of the Gilt Leaf, so this is one of those once per turn cards, but the impact of it is on a limited time span. I think it's going to be quite good against Matt here because he's playing a lot of expensive spells, but if he's got a more proactive draw, then he can empty out his hand and then Nat's trigger is going to do nothing at all. But I like his position here. I'm guessing he's named Red with the Lure-bound Scarecrow, so if he wants to send in Brian, then he needs to play another red creature so that Felix can't 2-for-1 him by blocking the Brian and making the Scarecrow die. But considering the potency of Nath, it might be... It's a tough block to go for. Otherwise, I think weighing up some sequencing options, so you generally want to run out Stink Drinker Daredevil as soon as possible to start discounting your giants and making mana for that. It would be nice if he had enough mana to play a red creature, attack with both, threaten to activate the Nullspine Ridge. And the Thundercloud Shaman sitting in his hand is going to be really killer here. It is one of the only sweeper effects in the cube. It's often a devastating one-sided sweeper. And it looks like he's got something good under the Nullspine Ridge, so exiling Nath, making sure it can't block. Felix takes 8, and Matt gets a free spell off of the Ridge. This is pretty sick. Getting the Ridge to cast the spell is quite a rare experience. And so the Nath comes back, and then Matt uses the Ridge spell to get rid of the Nath. So these have been some of Felix's best cards. Lignify, Garruk, and Nath I would describe as cards that perform quite well in this cube, so the fact that Matt has managed to answer all of them bodes very well for him. I think the quality of Felix's spells is likely to be going down for the rest of the game. He's got the Liege there, but his leftovers are not looking very good. The double cleave is quite situational. And he's got the Liege down, but it's only got one other creature, and that creature is white. So Matt's done a good job of disrupting Felix's best cards. He should be able to plow through the leftovers with relative ease. But he does need to be a little bit wary of losing the Lure-bound Scarecrow to its drawback ability. I think he's got a strong eye on that, but it's the kind of blunder you really don't want to make from such a strong position. And it looks like he's just chilling, not in a rush to trade off his Brian Stoutarm or the Lure-bound Scarecrow. And Lorehound is going to... Moonhold, rather, is going to waste some of Felix's mana. And it looks like the plan is to play the Baldwyr heavyweights and just throw it straight at Felix. Skip the combat step entirely. And before the heavyweight's downside resolves, Brian's going to end the game. So, nicely cleaned up by Matt. That was a great suite of answers. Neutralized a lot of Felix's best cards, and the game wrapped up pretty nicely. So here we've got two remarkably similar creatures, both 1-mana 1/1s that can spend mana to get bigger. No reason for either of them to be blocking the other one anytime soon, so likely we'll see these two each get in for a bit of damage, and Felix doesn't have a turn 2 play, so happy to just waste his mana on that. And there's another turn 1 play and in for 2 damage, so unusually fast start out of Matt here. But now this, with a creature, not something you usually want to leave back on defense because your opponent can just not attack and then you're down quite a lot of mana. But it looks like Felix doesn't have any 3-drops to play. He's got some strong cards at 4 and 5 mana, so he's just trying to bridge to that part of the game. And it looks like Matt's in a similar situation. He's just going to chill, level up his Figure of Destiny. And no plays from Felix once again. Shaping up to be a pretty slow game as neither player really wants to walk into the other one's defensive tools. And even though this is a 4/4, I think Felix wouldn't mind trading off his 1-mana creature for 3 -1 counters on it, thanks to Wither. Frees up his mana to be able to play out Nath next turn. And that is what he's going to do. And Matt's going to burn a Crib Swap on it, so he's managed to protect his Figure of Destiny, but now he's wide open to a Nath or some other bomb that can take over the game. It doesn't look like he's got much pressure in his hand. So if... Yeah, it looks like if Felix can stay alive a couple more turns, this Nath is going to run away from the game. So, solid attack here. He absolutely would not mind trading the Figure of Destiny for Nath, and seeing as though he's going to get a ton of 1/1s, Felix does not mind chump blocking here. And now Nath is going to cause some serious problems. Alright, Hedge Mage, one of the better hits for Matt. The trouble is, even though it's the weakest card in his hand, it's also the only one he can cast. If he doesn't draw a land off the top, he might be stranded. And it shouldn't be too hard for Felix to get a good block on the 4/4, which is going to lock Matt the rest of the way out of combat. He's got a double cleave that he can cast if he wants to go for that risk. But it looks like he's got something a bit safer. Risk the Redeemed. And Scarscale Ritual. So Scar Scale Ritual performs quite well in this block. There's a lot of cards like Nath that have some kind of passive ability that you don't want to get into combat. So putting a -1 counter on them, quite a low cost. Drawing cards, quite powerful with how stalled out the games are. As you might have seen if you've played with Muldrifter in this format, the divination effect is pretty good as it is, so being able to get that for 2 mana for a relatively minor drawback is a great deal. And Felix continuing to chump block. But his Soulbright Flamekin, Matt can give the Figure Trample and still get in for 3 damage. And there goes Matt's most likely tool for catching up. Burn Trail is a really strong removal spell. Could deal with Nath, but Matt's missed his forced land drop, and now that it's out of his hand, he's really running out of options here. And there's another Liege. Very nice to line that up here. So, Riss is back up to a 2-1. Looks like Matt doesn't want to block it with the 1-1. Riss can regenerate by sacrificing the token, so not getting much mileage making that block. And Felix is going on the offensive here because Murktide Liege is going to untap his creatures. So Matt is going to make the exchange here. He needs to cobble together some way to get back on the front foot if he wants to win this game. Daredevil is nice. Any 3-mana play helps get him out from under Nath eventually, and this makes the mana that he desperately needs for his Giants. Purity shuffles itself back in, so he can draw that later. But now Felix is far ahead enough on board. He's going for big attacks. Riss is gaining him a ton of life. I think Matt's best shot here is to build towards a huge Thundercloud Shaman. So he's going to need a second mountain. He's going to need to get some Giants in play. And with Nath being a 5-5, he can't do a single block with the Figure of Destiny, so looks like he's offering up the Stink Drinker Daredevil. And Double Cleave is just going to devastate him, so that's almost all of his remaining board. His Thundercloud Shaman is no longer an out. And just, I think, talking through some color filtering, these filter lands are extremely good for paying high devotion costs, lots of the same mana symbol, so they just get very complex to tap. So, even it up onto the last game. Looks like a slower start from Matt. Oh, and I think that's Ashling the Pilgrim, but we might be leading it off with something a little lower value, not expose it just yet. But it is going to be Ashling. So, Ashling's ability to grow at instant speed for a pretty reasonable rate means that you basically never want to trigger the damage ability. You just want to spend mana to put more counters on it. And once it gets beyond a certain size, your opponent can't attack into it. You have plenty of time to continue leveling it up, and eventually it's impossible for your opponent to produce a good block on it. And while this is very resource intensive, it is only a 2-mana creature, and a lot of the time you can get value with it with just the threat of activation. So here he does have a good attack into the cohort, but it looks like he's just going to hold it back in case Matt's got a trick. And he's happy to sit back, turn it into a 3/3. That's going to lock out most of Matt's creatures, and then he can try and get to work on deploying his bombs, running out Matt's removal. Oh, Fury Stoke Giant. So this is maybe a bit of a staring contest here, because yeah, he can't take out Ashling the Pilgrim, so he's going to have to just go for the Scuttlemutt. That is still pretty good, as it looks like Felix is leaning pretty heavy on the Scuttlemutt to make mana for him, as he missed a land drop last turn. And in a 3-color deck, it's quite likely that he's going to have color problems. And we see already he's getting his plays very badly disrupted, stuck on 3 lands. He's only got another 1 or 2 turn window to try and hit his 3rd land drop, his 4th land drop, and catch up on how the game is panning out. Now, to do this, Matt did have to use up his Fury Stoke Giant quite early, so it came at a real price to him. And setting up another hideaway. So the aura in Matt's hand is, on the first striker, the fire breathing is very good. It also gives him a white permanent to enable the cohort's ability. So he can set up to keep the pressure on and try and end the game before Felix can hit his 4th land drop. And willing to trade off the Fury Stoke Giant for the Ashling. Ashling does represent a lot of Felix's power to block smaller creatures. And very unlikely that... Quite hard to set up the Persist on Fury Stoke Giant to really matter. Your opponent's not going to block it in situations where it's going to match up well, so eventually it does kind of become a 3/3 unblockable. But the utility of that is low enough that he'd rather just get in for extra damage, keep the game timeline short to prevent Ashling from going out of control. And passing up probably the last chance to attack into the Ashling. So now that Felix is set up behind a big blocker, the Scarecrow is pretty obsolete. The cohort might be able to get there with enough land drops, but it's starting to lose utility. Oh, and here's a removal spell for it as well. Looks like Matt's going to need to set up a few more creatures in play to make that Fury Stoke Giant a threat not worth killing. But the timeline on that is really long, so he's got to get a few more creatures in play, get an attack with it, and then Felix has got the out of chump blocks, and he's only taking 3 a turn. So more likely we'll see Fury Stoke Giant sitting back on defense at that point in the game. And things are looking rough for Matt. Felix has stabilized. He's still at a pretty high life total. Looks like no plays this turn from Matt. Matt will be looking to maybe set up something with Thundercloud Shaman, get some slower giant synergy going. But as long as the Ashwing is around, he's going to be pretty locked out of combat. It's going to be able to grow pretty quickly if Felix needs a big blocker. And here we have a Liege and another elf. If Felix can set up a fairy to give his Sprite Chaser flying, he's going to be able to get much more aggro. And here we do see an answer for the Ashwing. But now that Felix has got a Changeling, his Sprite Chaser is a 3 power flyer, which is a pretty serious clock up against a stalled board like this. And pretty tough attacking with the Lordbound Scarecrow. There's a lot of double blocks that Felix is happy to make against it. And Fury Stoke Giant going to be staying out of combat until probably Matt's got another 2 creatures in play. Then the Death Trigger is really threatening something serious. And with Felix having a big flyer in play, it's unlikely he's going to be forced into attacking into the giant. Oh, but there's Chandra. Chandra is any Planeswalker's good on a board this stalled. So he can take out the flyer at a pretty big cost to himself. But then if Felix sends in the team, he can fairly easily kill Chandra. He'll probably lose 3 of his creatures. And unless Matt has some good top decks in the future, it's unlikely his Chandra is going to get better than it is this turn. And he's taking out the Liege, so that reduces a lot of the power on Felix's board. Oh, but he's got a big play here. It's Una, Queen of the Fae. So this is a enormous flyer. The activated ability is going to make more flying tokens. So if Felix ever untaps with Una, the game's just over. There's no way to catch up from making a bunch of 1/1 flyers without Thundercloud Shaman, and even that's not going to be enough to catch him up. Looks like the draw was just a land for the turn. And yeah, unfortunate without a third creature to use with the Fury Stoke Giant. The death trigger of that is not even threatening to kill the Una. And Felix is ready to see how many flyers he can get. So Matt mills 8 cards. Felix gets probably 4 flyers. No word on which color he's chosen, but I think white is a pretty safe bet. That is quite a few flyers. I think that's 4 or 5. I think it was naming red, so that's 3 flyers. Still representing a ton of damage in the air. If Pat's got a liege, it might be lethal this turn. But I think Felix is quite happy to play another game, another turn, activate Una again. He's got to be wary putting too many resources in play for Thundercloud Shaman. But with only one other giant in play, there's a good shot that he can play something that survives it. Oh, this is a different liege. So we're looking at 14 damage in the air, plus this wither threat. Putting Matt down to 2, so got to be some consideration for whether he can send in enough creatures on the ground to guarantee lethal, but it doesn't look like it. So, forcing some chump blocks here. So Matt can set up blocks where he kills... I believe he can kill all of Felix's ground creatures here. So Fury Stoke Giant trades with the... but the big wither creature is getting pumped up, so it's not even going to be a trade there. So Fury Stoke Giant kind of has to jump in front of the Wildslayer Elves to get the persist. If it blocks the Slasher, the -1 counters are going to prevent it from persisting. So if the Giant blocks there and the Scarecrow, probably blocking the Slasher to minimize damage. Then he's got to trade off the Soulbright Flamekin for the 2/2. That puts him to 1. The Lurebound Scarecrow gets to take out one of the surviving creatures with the Fury Stoke Giant trigger. But it would need to be Thundercloud Shaman plus something else at this point. And it looks like Matt's just got 3 lands in hand. Yeah, so because of Wither, there's no way to get the persist trigger on the Fury Stoke Giant, actually. So as it is, this block is lethal for Matt. And I think there's not really a block he can make to get out of this with a hope to winning the match. Looks like Felix is going to be... Well, turn to miss does buy him another turn. And I think he was trying to angle there for a surprise lethal on the way back. But with the Liege untapping all of Felix's creatures, he's going to have a ton of blockers. So the Liege untaps all of Felix's creatures. And it is something big. Oh, it's just a leveled up figure of destiny. And Felix takes it. Congratulations to Felix, winner of the inaugural Shadowmoor Lorwyn plane-based cube. Hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all next time.